China identifies first red line in U.S. relations. Beijing has demanded that Washington stops all contacts with Taipei at once. The Taiwan issue is the first red line that should not be crossed in relations between China and the U.S., Beijing has told Washington. The warning from the Chinese Foreign Ministry came early on Thursday, hours after Taiwanese leader Tsai Ing-wen met with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and other lawmakers in California. China firmly opposes and strongly condemns the high-profile meeting that took place on American soil, the ministry said in a statement. It seriously infringes upon China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and sends an egregiously wrong signal to the Taiwan independence separatist forces, it added. Beijing will take strong and resolute measures in response to egregiously wrong action taken by Washington and Taipei, the ministry warned. The Taiwan question is at the core of China's core interests and the first red line that must not be crossed in China-US relations, the statement read. According to Beijing, an independent Taipei and stability in the Taiwan Strait were as irreconcilable as fire and water. The Chinese Foreign Ministry urged the U.S. not go further down the wrong and dangerous path of trying to use the Taiwan issue to contain China. Washington should adhere to the One China principle and stop at once any form of official exchanges with Taiwan, it said. Taiwan has been self-governed since 1949, but never officially declared independence from China. Beijing, which considers the island to be a part of its territory, strongly opposes its contacts with the U.S. Despite officially recognizing Beijing as the sole legitimate authority in China since 1979, Washington maintains strong unofficial ties with Taipei, supporting its push for sovereignty and promising to defend the island militarily in the event of an attack from the mainland. We are stronger when we are together, Tsai told McCarthy during their meeting on Wednesday. The Taiwanese leader said she was grateful to the U.S. for helping with efforts to protect our way of life. McCarthy said friendship between the people of Taiwan and America is a matter of profound importance to the free world. It is critical to maintain economic freedom, peace, and regional stability. It's the second time that Tsai has met a U.S. House Speaker in less than a year. A visit by McCarthy's predecessor, Democrat Nancy Pelosi, to Taiwan last August caused a major spike in tensions between Beijing and Washington as China launched its largest ever military drills in the Taiwan Strait and slapped sanctions on Taipei. Ukrainian artillery kills its own soldiers who surrendered near Avdeyevka, Russian Defense Ministry. The Ukrainian artillery has fired at the positions of 14 Ukrainian soldiers who surrendered near Avdeyevka on purpose, the Russian Defense Ministry said on Thursday, adding that the fire killed all servicemen. The Kiev regime deliberately destroys its military personnel with artillery fire to suppress attempts to leave their positions and retreat under the attack of Russian troops, the ministry said in a statement. The ministry added that the Russian military were engaged in a clash near Avdeyevka on Wednesday. During the clash, a commander of a Ukrainian brigade informed the Russian side of its intention to surrender. The Russian soldiers completely halted the offensive to make way for the safe passage of the Ukrainian servicemen, according to the ministry. Taking into account the fact that it was already dark, Ukrainian servicemen were placed in a dugout until the morning for subsequent transfer to the rear zone of the Russian group. At night, Ukrainian artillery deliberately opened heavy fire on the dugout where the surrendered Ukrainian servicemen were located. As a result of a deliberate artillery attack by the armed forces of Ukraine, all 14 Ukrainian servicemen who laid down their arms were killed. The ministry said. The Russian Defense Ministry also said that a sabotage and reconnaissance group of the Ukrainian troops that tried to infiltrate near the village of Sluchovsk in Russia's Bryansk region was defeated and dispersed by artillery fire. Earlier in the day, Governor Alexander Bogomaz said that a border department of the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, prevented an infiltration attempt by 20 members of a Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group near Sluchovsk. Today, at about 8:30 am 5:30 GMT, state border units of the Western Military District, together with the Border Patrol of the Border Department of the FSB of Russia in the Bryansk region, vented an attempt of 15 militants of the Ukrainian military to infiltrate into the territory of Russia near the village of Sluchovsk, Bryansk region, the ministry said, adding that the enemy was defeated by artillery fire of the Western Military District. The sabotage group was dispersed and, having suffered losses, retreated to the territory of Ukraine. There were no casualties from the Russian side, the ministry concluded. South Korean lawmakers protest Japan's move to dump nuclear-contaminated water. Members of South Korea's National Assembly on Wednesday staged a protest in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul against Japan's decision to dump nuclear-contaminated wastewater into the sea. The lawmakers, all from the South Korean major opposition Democratic Party of Korea, DPK, had a meeting with Daisuke Namioka, a minister at the Japanese embassy, to voice their anger and objection. The National Assembly members later told the press that with the safety of people in Japan and neighboring countries at stake, Japan should withdraw its plan to discharge the radioactive wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear power plant damaged in an earthquake in 2011. We demand that not only South Korea, but also other neighboring countries can directly participate in the safety check process of the nuclear-contaminated wastewater. Japan should withdraw its plan to discharge the contaminated wastewater into sea until the neighboring countries express their consent clearly, said Yang Yi-won-young, member of the National Assembly from the Democratic Party. The lawmakers also said that the two countries should pause discussions on exporting fishing products until their safety is confirmed and the radioactive wastewater disposal details are provided for supervision. The National Assembly members have planned to travel to Fukushima Prefecture starting on Thursday. In 2011, following a massive earthquake off Japan's coast, 3 of the reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station melted down after a 15-meter-high tsunami smashed into the shoreside facility. The tainted water being stored in tanks at the plant is expected to soon reach capacity, and the lengthy process of dumping the radioactive water into the ocean is projected to take several decades. Japan decided in April 2021 to start dumping about 1.25 million tons of nuclear wastewater into the ocean spanning 30 years from 2023. Ukraine is targeting Russian civilian satellites, Moscow. Kiev and a number of foreign states are trying to tamper with means of communication, the Foreign Ministry has said. Ukraine has been trying to disrupt Russian civilian communication satellites, the Foreign Ministry in Moscow said on Wednesday, adding that unspecified foreign states were aiding Kiev in the effort. The Kiev regime, with the participation of specialists from a number of foreign states, is attempting to interfere with Russian civilian communication satellites. This is an outrageous violation of international law, the ministry said, warning that Moscow was in its full right to respond appropriately and possesses all the necessary capabilities to do so. It was not immediately clear how precisely Kiev had tried to disrupt the satellites, as the ministry did not elaborate on the matter any further. Russia has repeatedly experienced disruptions of TV broadcasts during the ongoing hostilities with Ukraine. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky briefly appeared on TV in southwest Russia back in January, with Belgorod authorities acknowledging the disruption affected satellite broadcasts. The other side has been experiencing similar disruptions as well, with arguably the most notable one occurring last June, when 2 Ukrainian sports channels showed an interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin instead of a World Cup football match. Western governments and private companies have provided Ukraine with satellite coverage for months. Most notably, the Starlink satellites operated by Elon Musk's SpaceX have become important tools for the Ukrainian troops in the ongoing conflict with Russia. Back in October, Russian diplomats warned that such satellites may end up becoming a legitimate military target. We are talking about the US and its allies using civil infrastructure components in space, including commercial ones, in armed conflicts, Konstantin Vorontsov, the deputy head of the Non-Proliferation and Arms Control Department at the Russian Foreign Ministry, said at the time. Responding to Vorontsov's remarks, U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby warned that Washington would hold Russia accountable for any such attack, should it occur. Recent OPEC Plus cuts prove Biden's reliance on foreign oil risks U.S. security, Texas oil regulator. The latest oil production cuts announced by the OPEC Plus countries underscore that President Joe Biden's reliance on foreign oil puts U.S. security at risk, Texas Railroad Commission, RRC, Chairwoman Christy Craddock told Sputnik. The RRC is the industry regulator in the top oil-producing U.S. state of Texas. OPEC Plus cut oil production by 9.7 million barrels per day in May 2020 due to a decrease in oil demand caused by the COVID-19 pandemic measures. In August 2022, the alliance started the final stage of canceling the cuts, but in November it cut the production once again by 2 million barrels per day from the maximum possible level of August. This decision is valid until the end of 2023. The latest action by OPEC Plus only further solidifies what we've known all along about President Biden's reliance on foreign oil. It is dangerous and puts American security at risk, Craddock said. U.S. President Joe Biden must abandon his energy policies that hamper U.S. energy production potential and allow U.S. energy firms to produce more that can benefit the world, Craddock told the media. Biden needs to stand down on his disastrous energy policies that cripple domestic production, and instead allow American operators, especially those in Texas, to produce the energy that powers the nation and the world, she said. Craddock's remarks come in light of the OPEC Plus Joint Ministerial Monitoring Committee, JMMC, announcement earlier this week about an additional voluntary oil production cut in Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Kazakhstan, Algeria, Oman, and Gabon, which will amount to 1.66 million barrels per day by the end of 2023. Biden's clean energy ambitions have discouraged new investment in oil production in the United States while he has used the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve to help lower gas prices in the country, but brought the supply to record lows. What happened with Trump's arrest and what is next? Former U.S. President Donald Trump was arrested and charged with 34 felonies related to falsifying business records in a Manhattan criminal court on Tuesday, April 4th. Prosecutors accused Trump, who pled not guilty, of undermining the 2016 election's integrity by participating in illegal hush money payments involving at least 3 people with information that could have damaged his presidential bid. The district attorney said it would prove Trump knowingly falsified New York business records to conceal criminal conduct and suppress damaging information from the public. Post-arraignment, Trump flew to Florida and addressed supporters at Mar-a-Lago, discussing the indictment and his 2024 campaign strategy. Despite Judge Merchan's warning against jeopardizing the rule of law or inciting unrest, Trump criticized both Alvin Bragg and the judge. Trump's defense has until August 8, 2023, to file motions, with the prosecution responding by September 19. Judge Merchan will rule on the motions at the December 4th in-person hearing. Russia's Donbass region takes stance on death penalty. The Donetsk People's Republic has abolished capital punishment, months after becoming part of the Russian Federation. The Donetsk People's Republic, DPR, will no longer issue or enforce death sentences in order to comply with Russian laws, it has announced. The decision was made after the republic became part of Russia in September, along with the Lugansk People's Republic, Zaporozhye region, and Kherson region. The move was announced on Thursday by Elena Shishkina, a member of the DPR's People's Council. She told TASS news agency that, since joining Russia, the republic has had to adjust its legislation so that it does not contradict the federal one. Law enforcement agencies are guided by the criminal and criminal procedure codes of the Russian Federation, Shishkina explained, noting that the death penalty would no longer be applied in the DPR, as it does not exist in the code of the Russian Federation. Shishkina added that current death sentences, which were handed down before the DPR became part of Russia, would not be carried out. Back in September, Russian MP Daniil Bessarabov suggested that convicts who had been issued the death penalty in the republic would instead receive life sentences. The DPR had previously lifted a moratorium on executions in July 2022. During that same month, authorities issued death penalties to 2 fighters from the Ukraine's Azov battalion, as well as 2 mercenaries from the UK and 1 from Morocco. However, the Republic ultimately did not carry out any of the sentences, and those foreign fighters have since been released. Capital punishment has not been used in Russia since 1996. In 1998, then-President Boris Yeltsin established a moratorium on the practice, and Russia's constitutional court has since introduced other provisions that make it legally impossible to apply the penalty in criminal cases. However, some lawmakers have recently called for the restoration of the death penalty in some cases, specifically for terrorism and pedophilia. Such proposals have come from the left-wing Just Russia, For Truth Party, and recently from the nationalist LDPR party following an attack in St. Petersburg that killed popular military blogger Vladimir Tatarsky. State Duma Speaker Vyacheslav Volodin also suggested back in June that the death penalty should be kept in the DPR, arguing that such a punishment was appropriate in wartime and befitting of fascists who intentionally bomb residential areas, hospitals, and schools. Putin announces plans to create security concept of Union State. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced on Thursday that there are plans to create a security concept of the Union State against the background of growing tensions. In this context, the issue of the beginning of the preparation of the security concept of the Union State, which was put on the agenda of the meeting and considered today, is of great importance. This document is meant to formulate the fundamental tasks of our cooperation in the sphere of growing tensions on external borders of our states, the sanctions and information war unleashed against us, Putin said at the meeting of the Supreme State Council of the Union State. The Russian president stated that Russia and Belarus are going to bolster their security and defense cooperation between the two countries, adding that this cooperation is especially important in light of the current complex geopolitical situation. Revised settlement agreement reached to compensate First Nations in Canada. A multi-billion-dollar revised settlement was reached to compensate those harmed by discriminatory underfunding of the First Nations children and families, the Canadian federal government said on Wednesday. Following the original settlement agreement, the revised final settlement agreement now includes a total of just over $23.34 billion Canadian dollars, around $17 billion, an increase of $3.34 billion Canadian dollars, said Indigenous Services Canada in a news release. According to Tuesday morning's release, First Nations across Canada came together to discuss and support the revised settlement agreement, and the Assembly of First Nations, AFN's First Nations in Assembly unanimously approved the draft revised settlement agreement. The proposed revised settlement agreement, designed to fully meet the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, CHRT's compensation orders, will be submitted to CHRT for confirmation before being brought to the federal court for approval. If approved, the process to implement the settlement will begin, the release said. More than 300,000 First Nations children and families have been waiting decades for recognition of the harms done to them through discriminatory practices, said AFN Manitoba Regional Chief Cindy Woodhouse. She added that this final settlement agreement is a long overdue turning point for so many thousands of families. AFN and the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society jointly launched a human rights complaint in 2007 with allegations that Ottawa's underfunding of unreserved child welfare services amounted to discrimination, and that First Nations children were denied equal access to support ranging from school supplies and medical equipment. CHRT eventually ruled in the complainant's favor, and last year the federal government offered to spend $20 billion Canadian dollars to reform the unreserved child welfare system and another $20 billion Canadian dollars on compensation. Gaza militants launch projectiles towards Israel following tension at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Palestinian militants on Wednesday night fired 2 projectiles from the Gaza Strip towards southern Israel following tension at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in East Jerusalem. An Israeli army spokesman said in a press statement that the 2 projectiles were launched from the Gaza Strip towards the Gaza border. According to the spokesman, one of the projectiles failed to cross the border and landed in Gaza, while the other landed in the border fence area inside Israeli territory. No injuries or damage were reported, and no one has so far claimed responsibility. The Israeli Army radio reported that sirens were turned on in the Israeli towns bordering the Gaza Strip due to the firing. The two missiles were fired at southern Israel when Israel Defense Forces Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi was in the area to celebrate the Jewish Passover holiday with the soldiers, according to the radio. Officials of the Islamic resistance movement of Hamas and eyewitnesses said that an explosion was heard at the Gaza Strip's border. The incident took place after Palestinian militants fired 9 projectiles, 4 of which were intercepted by the Israeli Army Iron Dome, at pre-dawn from the Gaza Strip to southern Israel, according to the Israeli Army spokesman. The latest firing of the 2 projectiles came after the tension in Al-Aqsa Mosque compound early on Wednesday, when Israeli police raided the mosque in East Jerusalem and clashed with dozens of Palestinian worshippers inside. The month of Ramadan this year coincides with the Passover holiday for the Jews, which raises fears of a recurrence of violent clashes between Israeli police and Palestinians as seen in the past years. NATO must observe mandate, avoid Asia. Grenville Cross says efforts to expand alliance could pose threat to peace, stability in Far East. On April 4, 1949, when the North Atlantic Treaty, the Washington Treaty, was signed in Washington, D.C., the then US President, Harry Truman, assured the world that nobody need be concerned by it. Although, he said, there are those who claim that this treaty is an aggressive act on the part of the nations which ring the North Atlantic, this was absolutely untrue. It would, he promised, be a positive, not a negative, influence for peace, and its abuse by his successors would have dismayed him. The treaty was based on the United Nations Charter, Article 51, which affirms the right of independent states to individual or collective defense. It recognized that armed forces could be used to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area, Article 5. It was, therefore, purely a regional security pact. Once the treaty was signed by its 12 founders, including the US, the UK and France, it resulted in the creation of the North Atlantic Alliance. Shortly afterward, it spawned the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, headquartered in Belgium, with a Supreme Allied Commander, currently U.S. General Christopher G. Cavalli. With NATO's creation, a military structure was in place to implement the alliance's defensive agenda. The significance of the treaty lay in the involvement of the U.S., given that this was its first peacetime military alliance outside the Western Hemisphere. Whereas the U.S. saw the treaty as a means of projecting its influence in Europe in the aftermath of World War II, the other signatories wanted to tie the U.S. closely to the UK and Europe, believing this was their best defense against any threats posed by the Soviet Union. As the NATO Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, explained on January 30, 2023, NATO was established as a response to the threats we saw from the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union after the Second World War. And that was our main focus. The Soviet threat, however, was only part of the story, and the treaty's signatories also hoped the alliance would help to prevent any revival of extreme nationalism in Europe, as well as stimulating Europe's political integration. The US, moreover, together with 7 allies, including, once again, the UK and France, was also instrumental in creating the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, SEATO, in Manila, in 1954. Its model was NATO, and it was hoped that the 8 militaries could be coordinated in the interests of collective defense. With the exception, however, of the Philippines and Thailand, SEATO members were not located in Southeast Asia, and the U.S., which footed almost 25% of its bills, saw it as a part of its Cold War containment policy. After, however, the US-backed government in South Vietnam was defeated in 1975, France withdrew its support, and SEATO was dissolved in 1977, meaning the US had to find new methods of projecting its influence in the Far East. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the rise of the European Union, and the marginalization of Europe's far right, the rationale for NATO largely disappeared, although the last thing the US wanted was to see it going the way of SEATO, as it was far too useful for that. Washington, therefore, encouraged NATO to expand its membership, urged it to become more aggressive, and sanctioned mission creep, becoming involved in areas unrelated to its own. In 1999, for example, NATO launched a bombing campaign against Yugoslavia during the Kosovo War. Before doing so, however, the US and its allies sought the approval of the UN Security Council. Although this was not forthcoming, NATO nonetheless unleashed its bombs in violation of the UN Charter, which, in Chapter 8, prohibits the use of force without Security Council approval save for self-defense against an armed attack. In 2011, moreover, a NATO-led coalition intervened militarily in Libya's civil war, supporting rebels seeking to topple the country's leader, Muammar Gaddafi. Although it was claimed that the intervention was designed to protect the civil population, it was apparent to many that it was actually about regime change, with Gaddafi having been, for many years, a thorn in the flesh of the US. Indeed, in 1986, when Washington mounted its Operation El Dorado Canyon, 100 planes bombed Libya's two main cities, Tripoli and Benghazi. The barracks containing the residential compound where Gaddafi and his family lived were specifically targeted, and although he survived, his infant daughter, Hannah, reportedly did not. Once conflict erupted in Ukraine in 2022, NATO insisted on getting involved, even though Kiev is not a NATO member. Although, by recruiting states into NATO that border Russia, arousing its security fears, NATO had helped to provoke the conflict, it is now doing all it can, through proxies, to engineer Moscow's defeat, such being Washington's political objective. On January 30, 2023, for example, its Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, announced, "We have been providing Ukraine unprecedented assistance, and we must keep supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes." Although Stoltenberg's belligerence will have delighted NATO's warmongers almost as much as it did the US military-industrial complex, it will do nothing to bring peace back to Europe, and he is focused on escalating the conflict. Indeed, after China, on February 24, released its 12-point peace plan, Stoltenberg immediately cast doubt upon it, taking his cue from the US President, Joe Biden, who inquired, "How could it be any good?" Stoltenberg, like his predecessors, is incapable of independent thinking, which suits Washington down to the ground. As its de facto leader and principal funder, the US expects NATO to support its foreign policy objectives around the world, even if it means straying outside its defensive mandate. Thus, when Stoltenberg visited South Korea on January 30, 2023, he made a speech that could have been scripted for him by the White House. He expressed the hope that NATO and Seoul could do more together, and said, "We may be oceans apart, but our security is closely connected." Having welcomed Seoul's participation, for the first time, in NATO's summit in Madrid in 2022, Stoltenberg declared that what happens here in Asia matters to NATO, given our security is connected. He then assured his hosts, without providing details, that you can count on NATO to stand with the Republic of Korea. After leaving Seoul, Stoltenberg flew to Tokyo, where he announced that no NATO partner is closer or more capable than Japan, meaning it has embraced US hegemony. It currently hosts about 50,000 American troops in 23 military bases. On January 31, when he met the Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, he warmly endorsed Japan's rearmament plans. He also welcomed Japan's transition into NATO's new Individually Tailored Partnership Program, ITPP, which is expected to elevate bilateral cooperation to new heights that reflect the challenges of a new era. The ITPP was first discussed in 2022, when Kishida became the first Japanese leader to attend a NATO summit, and it provides a framework that is tailored to each partner's objectives for its relationship with the alliance. In other words, NATO is seeking to weave Japan, together with South Korea, into its long-term planning for the Far East, and Kishida, as a US patsy, is happy to oblige. Whereas Seoul opened a representative office at the NATO headquarters last year, Tokyo will follow suit this year. And Stoltenberg applauded Japan's intention to participate regularly in the North Atlantic Council, NATO's principal political decision-making body, and the NATO Chiefs of Defense meetings. In a joint statement, the two leaders announced, we are convinced that the Japan-NATO cooperation will demonstrate its value under this severe and complex security environment, meaning that Tokyo now sees its role as that of a U.S. outrider. And Kishida even agreed to provide more support for Ukraine. Although NATO's belligerent activities were welcomed by Kishida, others deplored their foolhardiness. When, for example, on February 16, 2023, Quinn Marschik, a contributing fellow at the Washington-based think tank Defense Priorities, reviewed Stoltenberg's gallivanting in Nikkei Asia, he pointed out that, instead of trying to de-escalate the Ukraine conflict, he appeared ready to tie the alliance, NATO, into potential future conflicts in Asia, risking war with nuclear-armed China. He explained that NATO has no business in the Indo-Pacific region, and should stick to its North Atlantic mandate and avoid stoking powder kegs on the other side of the world. Not only had Stoltenberg exceeded NATO's geographic mandate, but he had also sought to drag South Korea and Japan into the West's inflammatory democracies versus autocracies paradigm. Although Marschik's analysis was spot on, it must also be remembered that Stoltenberg is not a free agent, given that NATO is now, more than ever, Washington's baby. Although the U.S. lost SEATO in 1977, it is now, instead of reviving it, relying on NATO to help boost its Far East strategy, which includes stoking regional tensions, recruiting new allies, and using Taiwan to provoke Beijing. In such circumstances, apparatchiks like Stoltenberg have little option but to fall into line. Thus, on February 1, 2023, Stoltenberg told Nikkei Asia that NATO was concerned over China's threatening rhetoric and coercive behavior over Taiwan. This was why NATO has deepened its ties with the Asia-Pacific nations, including Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea. As the U.S. has also deepened its own links with those countries, it clearly expects NATO to play a complementary role, which should surprise nobody. There are, after all, those in the U.S. Congress and elsewhere who now openly advocate the transformation of NATO into a global alliance of nations who are prepared to follow the U.S., and it appears the likes of Stoltenberg are now busy laying the groundwork. On July 14, 2021, for example, then-US Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger said that instead of creating a new organization, it would be preferable to bring some of these freedom-loving countries in Asia into the NATO construct. If this can be achieved, NATO will be able to enlist some of China's neighboring states, thereby threatening it in exactly the same way it has threatened Russia. Although gullible states like Japan may play along, most Asian countries are self-respecting, and would not, whatever the inducements, sell their souls in that way. What, therefore, NATO needs to do is to concentrate on its original mandate, promote European security and not allow itself to be led up the garden path by the U.S. If, as it claims, it wants a safer world, it should stop dancing to the music of the warmongers, who feed off conflict. It must understand that its aggressive shenanigans in the Far East are unwelcome, and prioritize peaceful coexistence in the Asia-Pacific region. If, moreover, NATO imagines that, as a U.S. adjunct, it can halt China's resurgence, challenge its sovereignty or divide its people, it must think again. And the sooner it does so, the better, not least because it will promote the sort of global harmony to which its founding fathers signed up in 1949. U.S. opposes EU efforts to offer Ukraine path to join NATO, media reports. The United States, Germany, and Hungary are opposing efforts by EU countries, including Poland and the Baltic states, to provide Ukraine with a path to join NATO at the upcoming summit in July, the British media reported on Thursday, citing 4 officials involved in the negotiations. The split was clear during a meeting of NATO foreign ministers this week, the report said. Volodymyr Zelensky has said he will only attend the summit in Vilnius if offered concrete steps to join NATO. Sudan reportedly postpones civilian rule agreement over military reform issues. After the army toppled a civilian administration in October 2021 that had deposed longtime leader Omar al-Bashir in 2019, Sudan has been experiencing political unrest. The military decided on a roadmap for transferring authority to civilians in December of last year. The agreement agreement between the military, paramilitary, and civilians that was supposed to restart the democratic transition in Sudan after the 2021 coup has been postponed once more following last week's setback, local media has reported. According to the civilian blog Forces for Freedom and Change, FLC, as quoted in the reports, the signing of the framework agreement calling for a return to civilian military power sharing, a requirement for the resumption of international aid to the nation, will not take place as scheduled on Thursday. The signing has been postponed due to the resumption of talks between the military, on April 1st and 6th, the statement said, as per the reports. Negotiations have made progress on several points, but one final issue has yet to be finalized, supposedly discussing the ways to incorporate the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, into the regular military. The opposition has reportedly called for protests on Thursday, while the government has proclaimed April 6th a public holiday in preparation of rallies. According to the media, the rivalry between General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, head of the army and leader of the October 25, 2021, coup, and General Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, also known as Hemedti, who commands the ex-militiamen of the Darfur War now grouped into the RSF, is what is keeping Sudan in a state of impasse instead of the issues between civilians and the military. Earlier this week, another Sudanese media outlet reported that the parties to the framework agreement decided to delay the signing of the final agreement from the originally scheduled date of April 1st to April 6th in order to give the military branch of the government more time to sort out disagreements over military integration and reform. The current political process would come to an end with the signing of the final agreement between the ruling military junta and the more than 40 political parties and groups that signed the framework agreement on December 5th, opening the door for democratic governance under the direction of the civilian population. US South Korea drills driving situation on Korean peninsula to brink of nuclear war, report. The South Korean Defense Ministry earlier stated that the goal of the war games was to practice coordination and demonstrate the two's extended deterrence against alleged threats issued by North Korea. Pyongyang may respond with an offensive action to joint military drills conducted by Washington and Seoul, a North Korean media outlet has quoted international security analyst Ko Ju-hyun as saying. In an article published in the outlet, Ko slammed the exercises as a trigger for driving the situation on the Korean peninsula to the point of explosion. The reckless military confrontational hysteria of the U.S. and its followers against the DPRK North Korea is driving the situation on the Korean peninsula to an irreversible catastrophe, to the brink of a nuclear war, according to the author. The analyst argued that the US South Korea drills have turned the peninsula into a huge powder magazine which can be detonated any moment. The U.S. and South Korean forces have been carrying out an array of annual springtime military exercises since March, which in particular saw air and sea drills involving a U.S. aircraft carrier and strategic bombers B-1B and B-52 bombers. According to the South Korean Defense Ministry, the exercises aim to show Washington's and Seoul's extended deterrence against alleged North Korean threats. North Korea responded by increasing its military activity, which included firing a sophisticated intercontinental ballistic missile and testing what Pyongyang described as a nuclear-capable underwater attack drone. In February, North Korea's foreign ministry warned that the U.S. and South Korea would face unprecedentedly persistent and strong counteractions if they carry out planned military drills this year that Pyongyang regards as preparations for an aggression war. Gloomy outlook issued for U.S. dollar. The greenback may fall by another 15% against rival currencies by mid-2024, an investment services company says. The US dollar could weaken by as much as 15% against major world currencies over the next 18 months, as inflation continues to cool, allowing the Federal Reserve to loosen its monetary policy, according to Horizon SLJ Capital. A research note released on Tuesday by the firm's chief executive, Stephen Jen, said the U.S. Federal Reserve is likely close to, or already beyond, peak hawkishness, meaning that rate cuts are on the horizon. The Fed's 9 previous hikes, in addition to the tighter credit conditions caused by the U.S. banking crisis, already suggest inflation is trending to the downside, he concluded. We expect U.S. inflation to continue to decline at roughly the same pace as it rose in 2021 and the first half of 2022. Historically, there has been scant evidence of downside stickiness in inflation, even if there is evidence of downside price and wage level stickiness, Jen wrote in the note. Cited by Business Insider. The already subdued level of economic activity in major parts of the world will, ironically, likely prevent global demand from collapsing, which points to a significantly weaker U.S. currency, the analyst argued. The U.S. dollar index, which measures the strength of the dollar against a basket of rival currencies, has slipped 2.46% over the last 4 weeks after a 7.9% gain in 2022. According to Jen, in the next 18 months the greenback is vulnerable to substantial, 10 to 15%, depreciation. Stephen Jen is known for inventing the so-called dollar smile theory, in accordance with which the greenback tends to strengthen when the U.S. economy is either strong or weak, but dwindles at times of stagnation. The key point to make here is that, consistent with our dollar smile framework, fading inflation with a soft landing should push the dollar into the deep trough of the dollar smile, Horizon strategists said, noting this could mean 10% generalized dollar depreciation this year. And more next year. Tesla outlines means and costs of switching to sustainable energy economy. The plan for the creation of a sustainable energy economy proposed by Tesla suggests that this scheme would require some $10 trillion in investments. Even though a transition to a sustainable energy economy would be costly, it is technically feasible and less costly than sticking by the existing unsustainable energy economy. U.S. clean energy and automotive company Tesla has claimed in its Master Plan Part 3 that was originally unveiled last month by Elon Musk himself. The people behind the plan postulate that this transition would cost some $10 trillion, pointing out that, at the 2022 investment rate, about $14 trillion is projected to be spent on fossil fuels over the next 20 years. Earth will move to a sustainable energy economy, Musk said at the event in Austin, Texas, where the master plan was laid bare. And it will happen in your lifetime. The tech mogul and Tesla's founder also argued that switching to sustainable energy would not force people to be austere and to stop using electricity. The third part of Tesla's master plan entails using renewable energy sources to feed the existing power grid, switching to electric vehicles, employing planes and boats that can be sustainably fueled, and introducing heat pumps for residential, commercial, and industrial buildings. Modeling reveals that the electrified and sustainable future is technically feasible and requires less investment and less material extraction than continuing today's unsustainable energy economy, explained the authors of the paper outlining the plan, which was published earlier this week. Countries increasingly push for de-dollarization. The U.S. dollar's preeminence has periodically been called into question, and recently, more countries have been shifting to other currencies in moves that could prove long-lasting. Recently, RT reported that the U.S. dollar and euro make up less than half of Russia's export settlements as of January, citing official data. India's oil trade, in response to the turmoil of U.S.-led international sanctions on Russia, provides the strongest evidence of a shift away from the dollar that could prove lasting. Paying for oil in dollars has been a nearly universal practice for decades. India is the world's number 3 importer of oil, and Russia became its leading supplier after the Russia-Ukraine conflict began. Indian customers have paid for most Russian oil in non-dollar currencies since December 5 last year, including the United Arab Emirates dirham and more recently the Russian ruble, multiple oil trading and banking sources told Reuters. Separately, Russian President Vladimir Putin said in September that Moscow had agreed to sell gas supplies to China in yuan and rubles instead of in dollars. IMF Deputy Managing Director Gita Gopinath said in the month after the Russia-Ukraine conflict started that sanctions on Russia could erode the dollar's dominance by encouraging smaller trading blocs using other currencies. Last week, Southeast Asian countries agreed to reinforce the use of local currencies in the region and reduce reliance on major international currencies in an effort to avoid spillover from the global crisis. At a meeting of finance ministers and central bank governors of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. The move reflects the de-dollarization process going on in several parts of the world, said David E. Sumuel, chief economist of Indonesia's Bank Central Asia, the largest privately owned bank in the country. The trade and investment relations have changed fundamentally, yet the global monetary architecture remains practically the same, Sumuel said, adding that the de-dollarization process has started not only in Southeast Asia but also in Latin America and the Middle East. He said that sudden policy changes in the U.S. and other central banks always caused volatility in the region, so ASEAN countries hope to use more local currencies to promote economic stability and reduce spillover effects like high inflation. Deutsche Bank shares plunge as global banking worries persist. Shares in Germany's largest bank, Deutsche Bank, tumbled on Friday, dragging down other major European banks and indexes as fears of contagion in the banking system spread. The Frankfurt-listed stock closed 8.5% lower, after slumping by as much as more than 14% at one point during Friday's trading session. The drop follows a spike in the cost of insuring the bank's debt against the risk of default. Its 5-year credit default swaps shot up to a 4-year high of above 220 basis points, BPS, from 142 BPS just 2 days ago, based on data from S&P Market Intelligence. Speaking in response to the sharp fall in the bank's share prices, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz sought to shore up confidence in the country's biggest lender. Deutsche Bank has thoroughly reorganized and modernized its business model and is a very profitable bank, said Scholz at a news conference in Brussels. He dismissed comparisons between Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse, saying there's no reason to worry. The capital adequacy of European banks is robust, thanks to the work we've put in over the past few years and also thanks to the efforts of the banks themselves, Financial Times reported Scholz as saying. Despite Scholz's attempts to calm market jitters, a steep sell-off in banking stocks hit European indexes on Friday. At market close, the DAX in Frankfurt lost 1.66%, the CAC 40 in France fell 1.74%, and the FTSE 100 in the UK was down 1.26%. UBS, Société Générale, Barclays, BNP Paribas, and Commerzbank were among the banks that saw their stock prices fall. The latest rout in banking shares came after the emergency rescue of Credit Suisse by UBS and in the wake of the collapse of 2 U.S. banks. These recent developments have caused the market to fret that regulators and central banks have yet to contain the worst shock to the sector since the 2008 global financial crisis. However, some banking analysts stressed that there was a difference between Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank. Research firm Autonomous said it was crystal clear Deutsche is not the next Credit Suisse, while JP Morgan analysts wrote we are not concerned and that Deutsche's fundamentals were solid. Paul van der Westhuizen, senior strategist at Rabobank, cited Deutsche's profitability as the fundamental difference between the two European banks, given Credit Suisse did not have a profitable outlook for 2023. Still, the bank's shares have lost more than a fifth of their value so far this month, with $3 billion wiped off its market value in the space of just 1 week. Some are expecting Europe's banking stocks to see continued fluctuation in the short term due to growing concerns of investors about the stability of the banking system. Further rate hikes by the U.S. Federal Reserve may also put more banks in an even more dire situation. Foreign retailers lost $1.5 billion after leaving Russian market, media reports. The foreign retail consumer brands which withdrew from the Russian market have lost about $1.5 billion in profit as a result, Russian newspaper reported on Thursday, citing business consultants in the know. The $1.3 to $1.5 billion loss estimate specifically concerns the non-food retailers which officially announced their withdrawal from Russia, with the addition of losses borne by the foreign companies which have not officially withdrawn from Russia but temporarily shut their stores in the country. The true figure might be closer to $2 billion, the newspaper said. H&M Group has reported $363 million in losses in 2022 resulting from the withdrawal from the Russian market, Inditex has reported over $300 million, IKEA almost $400 million, and Decathlon $140 million, the newspaper said, citing the company's financial reports. Luxury segment retailers Hermes and Moncler have together lost over $200 million as a result of withdrawing from Russia, the consultants cited by the newspaper estimated. Japanese brand Uniqlo, which has not announced its withdrawal but closed its shops in Russia for about a year, is likely bearing significant losses, the consultants were cited as saying. Over 180 foreign companies have limited their activities in Russia and about 15 have announced their plans to leave the market since the start of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. After Moscow launched its special military operation in Ukraine in February 2022, a slew of Western businesses responded by suspending or downsizing their operations in Russia. Most experts agree that this is due to logistical and financial disruptions caused by the Western sanctions against Russia. German arms business booming amid Ukraine crisis, Bloomberg. The country reportedly ranked 6th globally in weapons exports in 2022. German defense contractors are enjoying order backlogs and soaring profits amid global rearming due to the conflict in Ukraine, Bloomberg reported on Wednesday. Citing the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, the news outlet noted that the country ranked 6th in arms exports last year, after the US, France, Russia, China, and Italy. While the final figures are still pending, reports say Berlin approved arms exports totaling over €8.35 billion, $9.13 billion, last year, the country's second highest figure ever, after the all-time high of €9.35 in 2021. Its biggest order in 2022 was reportedly the sale of 3 submarines made by the Senkrab Marine Systems, which were bought by Israel for €1 billion each. Dusseldorf-based arms manufacturer Rheinmetall, the country's largest defense contractor, reported record €6.4 billion earnings for 2022, up by 27% from 2021, along with historically high new orders and a record backlog of €26.6 billion. The company is currently installing a new munitions assembly line for over €10 million, citing growing demand. High-performance radar specialist Hensoldt in February reported a record €5.4 billion order backlog, saying that Russia's military operation in Ukraine had put the need for an efficient defense industry back into the political and social spotlight. Analysts unsurprisingly link the surge in German arms exports with the conflict in Ukraine. Kiev reportedly became the biggest recipient of German arms last year, having bought €2.24 billion worth of defense equipment and machinery from the country. However, German arms deliveries are not limited to Ukraine, with the Netherlands ranking second at €1.83 billion, followed by the US, UK, and Hungary. However, the expansion of the defense industry does not sit well with the country's populace, Bloomberg notes, with polls showing only about half of Germans in support of arming Ukraine. Webb telescope discovers oldest known galaxies. The James Webb Space Telescope has discovered 4 of the most distant galaxies ever observed, one of which was formed just 320 million years after the Big Bang. Using the NIR-CAM, near-infrared camera, and NIR-SPEC, near-infrared spectrograph, instruments that captures infrared radiation, the James Webb was able to record 4 of the most distant galaxies from the Milky Way that have ever been seen through the lens of Earth's telescopes. They were formed less than half a billion years after the Big Bang, while the present universe is already about 13 billion years old. The most distant of the 4 galaxies, called Jade's GSZ 13-0, formed just 320 million years after the Big Bang. And it is the most distant cosmic object that astronomers have recorded. NIR-CAM is the main imaging unit of the telescope, operating in the 0.6 to 5 μm range. 1 μm equals 0.000001 m. NIR-SPEC allows physical properties of astronomical objects, such as mass or chemical composition, to be determined. The instrument consists of multiple cells with individual control, which allows it to concentrate on specific objects, sifting out unnecessary radiation. NIR-SPEC can provide spectroscopy in the same range as NIR-CAM. These results are the culmination of why the NIR-CAM and NIR-SPEC teams joined together to execute this observing program, said co-author Marcia Rica, NIR-CAM principal investigator from the University of Arizona. All four galaxies are extremely low in mass, about 100 million times the mass of the Sun. By comparison, the Milky Way, according to some estimates, contains 1.5 trillion solar masses. All of the stars were formed at about the same speed as the stars in our galaxy. The frontier is moving almost every month, said Peter Van Dockum, an astronomer at Yale University not involved in the research, adding that there was only 300 million years of unexplored history of the universe between these galaxies and the Big Bang. The findings were published in 2 articles in the journal Nature Astronomy. Hainan Expo, can AI drive the consumer electronic products market? While the growing hype around ChatGPT and similar tools has placed artificial intelligence, AI, in the spotlight, consumer-facing technology companies believe that more AI-powered electronics will drive a new form of consumption, a participant of an upcoming expo event in China told CGTN. The 3rd China International Consumer Products Expo, CIP, or Hainan Expo will be held from April 10 to 15 in Haikou, the capital of the southern tropical province of Hainan. Over 3,100 brands from 65 countries and regions will be present at the event, almost double the number of brands from the year before. Consumer electronic products will be among the products showcased at the expo as China has a significant share of the global market for smartphones, PCs and smart devices, and the advances in AI have made smart devices more integrated into people's lives. Both the AI 2.0 era triggered by ChatGPT and the increasing demand of the post-pandemic era have driven the growth of AI consumer electronics, Jean Wenliu, the Chief Strategy Officer of Flightex Consumer Business Group told CGTN. China's leading intelligent speech and AI company IFLYTEK has participated at the SIC for 2 consecutive years and will join this year's expo as well. According to Jean, the company's Intelligent Translator series have experienced a 91% increase in sales year-on-year for the period between January and February 16, 2023. From computational photography and video beauty filters to autonomous driving and intelligent cabins, and then to intelligent conferences and cross-border business, AI has permeated every corner of the consumer electronics sector, Jean said. According to a research report by China International Capital Corporation, CICC, the global consumer electronics industry is set to recover in 2023. The demand for artificial intelligence of things, AIoT, is expected to rebound, with various segments like AR, VR, service robots, energy storage, and intelligent vehicles driving up the business outlook for the consumer electronics industry, said the CICC research. Jean added that China's technology products are evolving into higher quality, personalized, and intelligent ones. Products like foldable screen mobile phones, all-in-one home cleaning robots, and customized peripherals are examples of consumption upgrades in China, and they are some of the fastest-growing submarkets in their respective categories. China's large and high-end market undoubtedly has great appeal for both domestic and foreign manufacturers, said Jean. This market will bring new breakthroughs for global economic recovery. Russia's Ryabkov, U.S. ambassador discussed WSJ correspondent's detention. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov and new U.S. ambassador in Russia Lynn Tracy discussed the issue of detention of Wall Street Journal correspondent Evan Gershkovich during a meeting on Thursday, the Russian Foreign Ministry said. On April 6, Ryabkov met Tracy at her request. During the discussion of the issue raised by L. Tracy about the detention of an American citizen E. Gershkovich in Russia, the attention of the head of the diplomatic mission was drawn to the serious nature of the charges brought against him, the ministry said in a statement. According to the ministry, the U.S. aims to pressure the Russian authorities in a court when making a lot of noise. thinks about this case. The issue of access to him Gershkovich by representatives of the American embassy, who were promptly notified of the fact of detention, is being resolved taking into account the existing consular practice in the legislation of the Russian Federation, the ministry added. Meanwhile, the Moscow City Court's press service told Sputnik that the Cour will consider on April 18 the Wall Street Journal correspondent Evan Gershkovich's appeal against his detention on charges of espionage in Russia. The consideration of Gershkovich's appeal is scheduled for April 18, the source said. On March 30, the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, detained Gershkovich in Ekaterinburg on suspicion of espionage in favor of the United States. According to the FSB, the journalist was collecting classified information about the activities of one of Russia's military-industrial complex firms. Later that day, the Lefortovo District Court of Moscow decided to place Gershkovich in pretrial detention for 2 months until May 29. The Wall Street Journal has denied the allegations of espionage and demanded Gershkovich's immediate release. EU High Representative Josep Borrell, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres and US President Joe Biden, among many other Western leaders, have condemned the journalist's detention. Kanye West changes his mind about Jewish people. The rapper's decision comes after watching Jonah Hill's performance in 21 Jump Street. U.S. rap artist Kanye West has watched the comedy 21 Jump Street starring actor Jonah Hill, and it has changed his outlook on Jewish people, he wrote on Instagram on Saturday. The musician has been at the center of multiple anti-Semitism scandals. Watching Jonah Hill in 21 Jump Street made me like Jewish people again, West said. No one should take anger against one or two individuals and transform that into hatred towards millions of innocent people, he elaborated, possibly referring to himself in the post that has already garnered 1.4 million likes. West concluded the post by thanking Hill and saying he loves him. The rapper, who legally changed his name to Ye, is a multi-Grammy award-winning artist and producer. In October 2022, Ye posted to Twitter that he was about to go DEFCON 3 on Jewish people, a reference to the U.S. Defense Readiness Alert System. The tweet was removed and West's account was suspended. In December, West was a guest on the controversial InfoWars podcast, hosted by Alex Jones. During the show, the rapper stated that he sees good things about Hitler. West's Twitter account was reinstated by the platform's new CEO, Elon Musk, in November. However, the very next month the artist found himself banned once again after he tweeted an image of a swastika inside the Star of David. West's anti-Semitic remarks have cost him partnerships with multiple brands like Vogue, Balenciaga, and Gap. German sneaker brand Adidas announced a review of their billion-dollar deal with Ye, which impacted the performer's net worth, causing him to lose his billionaire status. Ironically, West had boasted in October that I can say anti-Semitic ST and Adidas cannot drop me. The Anti-Defamation League released a report in February counting at least 30 anti-Semitic incidents directly connected to West and his beliefs. The organization said that those instances demonstrate the ongoing influence of Ye's conspiratorial, bigoted rants. The movie that apparently caused the 180-degree turn in the artist's views, 21 Jump Street, is a 2012 buddy cop action comedy. It was a commercial and critical success, praised for its humor. Jewish-American comedian Jonah Hill played the character of Morton Schmidt in the film. He has not yet commented on his performance having such a profound effect on West. AFC Asian Cup confirmed for January-February slot in Qatar next year. The next edition of the Asian Cup will be held in Qatar from January 12th to February 10th, 2024, the Asian Football Confederation, AFC, confirmed on Wednesday. The quadrennial Continental Championship was set to be held in China in 2019, and then changed to Qatar, which hosted the FIFA World Cup in 2022. The 24-team tournament has been moved from mid-2023 to early 2024 to avoid the heat of the Gulf summer. Qatar has staged the Asian Cup twice, in 1988 and 2011, and it won the last tournament in the United United Arab Emirates in 2019. According to the AFC, the tournament will be staged across 8 stadiums, 6 of which were used during the World Cup. The official draw ceremony for the tournament will be held at the Qatari Opera House in Doha on May 11th, with the official match schedule also expected to be unveiled shortly after the draw.